Hi, and welcome back to Game Nights at Gary's. Today we're going to try something a little different and review a tabletop role-playing game. Today we will be talking about Possum Creek's title, Wanderhome. Wanderhome is inspired by both the Redwall series and the Studio Ghibli or Miyazaki films. It is a story-centric, rules-light Combat Zero game where everyone takes the role of an anthropomorphic animal. It is interesting to say the least. So rather than describe gameplay first, I'm going to give you my review and then I will go into a little bit about what happened in our first session. So some of the things I grade tabletop role-playing games on are, first of all, is it immersive? Wanderhome is very minimalistic in the rulebook when it comes to lore. It gives you lots of little hints and plot points that could be, but it doesn't spell everything out for you like other systems do. As you go through and build your characters, everyone kind of joins together and helps to build a cohesive mythology for the campaign they are playing. The second thing I try and look at as a tabletop role-playing game is it mechanically intuitive? Now, Wanderhome does not use dice or cards or anything like that. It is 100% story-driven, to the point that you don't even need one person designated as a game master. In fact, we had a group of 7 in our first game and had no game master, and you just kind of jump in and push the story where you think it needs to go if you have an idea for that individual moment. Now, there is a mechanic built in that allows you to earn tokens based on what your character does, and you can use those tokens to redirect the story. If somebody's trying to push a different way and you think it really needs to go one way, you can spend a token to kind of force the issue. However, that's not really the aim of the game. Obviously, we want everybody to have a good time. The third thing I like to look at with tabletop RPGs is the fun factor. And of course, your mileage may vary. It depends on your group. But the nature of this game, since it involves everybody and everybody's pitching in to tell this story, it's very easy to always be involved. In other games, it's common if you're the warrior and we're doing something sneaky, you're not going to be having a great time. You might not be interested in the story. In Wanderhome, that's okay. You don't have to be in the center of everything. Because it's a GM-less experience, you can jump in and start controlling the story for everyone else, or even just take control of one random NPC and flesh out their character. One of the other things I like to look at with tabletop role-playing games is character growth or scaling with time. In other systems, as you play for multiple sessions, your character increasingly grows up, gets stronger. You'll eventually be that invincible warrior or a wise archmage. That's not going to happen in Wanderhome. The playbooks for each character has a set amount of things that it allows you to do to get better. And honestly, granted this is just my opinion, but before you would fill up any individual playbooks rewards for completing sessions, your character would reach the logical conclusion of their story and find some place to call home, and you would retire that character. Speaking of characters, another thing I like to look at is character growth, or character creation rather. Wanderhome is incredibly simple to go through character creation. There is a handful of playbooks, all with very interesting ideas and concepts. The hardest part for me was choosing which playbook I wanted to go with. I eventually chose the Vagabond playbook for my first character, and I'll go into that a little bit more when we get to our session. But as you go through the playbooks, they have a series of this or that or yes or no questions that help flesh out your character. And then as you get to the end, you ask a player to your left a question and a player to your right a question and that kind of creates these little spider web of plot points between you and the rest of the table. So you don't have to decide why you're all traveling together. You all have this little story just kind of built in. And then, most importantly for me, is a game beginner friendly. Not every group of players is going to be dedicated veterans. I found Wanderhome to be incredibly beginner friendly. We had 7 people in our first session. A couple of them were players that had played D&D for quite a bit, but nothing else. And then we had one player who was pretty much brand new to role playing. What I liked about Wanderhome was the setting allowed us to give those players a chance to be in the spotlight, even if they weren't quite sure of what their character would do. There were moments we could stop and ask them, well, what do you think would happen in this point? Or when we stumble into these ruins, what do we see? And I would ask an initial person, what do you want to happen with the story? What do you think happens, or what do we see? And it would help to get them out of their comfort zone and role playing just a little bit more. So overall, I think it'll help them grow as players. So those are the 6 things I look at while judging a tabletop role-playing game. With that being said, let's go into our first session and I'll tell you how it went. Let me start by talking about my favorite subject, me. Out of all the playbooks, I decided to go with Vagabond, or the stereotypical rogue from most role-playing games. I went with a bat and called him a Dolo who watches. My looks were the standard big black cloak, scarf to cover my face, wanted posters with my name on it. I had to choose a few things that I was and a few things that I was not. The things that I said that I was a monster and a flirt, but I am not a hero or a gentleman. Next, I had to list things that I was falsely accused of, and then things that I was actually guilty of. I was falsely accused of high treason and stealing hearts, and I was guilty of killing my king and betraying the kingdom. There was a portion where I had to choose a secret that I still kept and something that was stolen from me. The secret I choose to keep is a secret of the High King, or the King of the High Mountain, I believe the lore calls it. And the item that was stolen from me would be the fact that my shadow can move of its own volition and wanders on its own. Now, the second player to make their character was a rabbit. I believe her name was Beatrice. And she chose the Guardian playbook, which allowed her to have an NPC child that she takes care of, that she can basically groom as a character for when her character retires. One of the background choices for the child was they were given a cloak from an untrustworthy vagabond. So we decided to make said cloak be my missing shadow. And we had given said shadow to the child to help hide him, because the second of his background options were that he was the true king of the floating mountain, or high king, or whatever it was. Now, between our 2 backstories sitting next to each other, we worked it out that I found that the High King had been grooming his heirs to move his consciousness to, and was basically using them like miniature clones so that he could live forever. And we worked to secret away this child and save his life. That would be the secret I had kept, and the reason why I betrayed my kingdom was that I did not come out and tell the entire kingdom that after I initially tried killing my High King, he just moved his body to one of his heirs. Other notable characters were it was an albatross named Trilby that had a giant albino rhino beetle they used to peddle their wares. They were a merchant. We had a mailman type character that was a penguin named Chilly Willy. There was a caretaker which looks after old forgotten gods, Salazar the Salamander. We had a raccoon dancer, I believe his name was Toots, and an otter mailman. That rounded up the basic cast. There were a lot of little nitty-gritty details that intertwined each character. I sat next to the otter and the rabbit, so most of my story connected to those two. Now that you know the cast, let's take a look at the setting. Every time you go to a new location in Wanderhome, you randomize where you're going. The way we did that was to consult the charts on the book that we had and roll a couple of dice. The three identifiers we got were Hallowed, Island, and Graveyard. So we took a little bit of time to discuss amongst the group what we should do to make that, a location. We started with Island, and rather than make an actual island in the middle of someplace, we chose an old growth forest, very hard to navigate, and in the center of it, a beautiful meadow. Not a lot of sound, quiet, somber. For the graveyard portion, we decided to make it the place of an old battle, and where soldiers had fallen, they had built cairns over them, and built paths through to keep you off the grass, well taken care of cobblestone paths, ropes and pylons and stuff to keep you on the path so you don't go wandering someplace you shouldn't. For the hallowed portion, we decided to make that the reason why this battle was fought in a random meadow in the middle of this woods was that there was a shrine to an old god there. And one of the random plot descriptors that came up was a folklore of a woman who loved a salmon-headed demon prince. We decided to go with that, and that kind of pushed heavily into the plot line we actually went with. Let me tell you a little bit more about that story. The story begins with us leaving this forest just teeming with sounds of life and stepping into a village devoid of most noise or sounds at all. It's somber and quiet. It's filled with a handful of huts that are in disrepair. It's obvious the villagers are doing what they can to just keep themselves alive and housed. The main animal we see shuffling around are chameleons, although out of the windows in the huts we can see eyes peeking out. Later on, we would find out that the village was also home to a number of slow loris. Definitely a creepy vibe at the whole point thing that we were being watched. Almost immediately, our group split up into two. One group was with the merchant who was trying to sell some items, make a profit for us. The other group started to walk the paths and explore the site of the battle and all the graveyard, essentially. And I won't point fingers, but somebody decided to stir up trouble and mess with one of the cairns, which caused a creepy old chameleon caretaker to come and chastise us. Memorable point about her was one of her eyes could not focus and just continually rotated around in her head. Kind of comical when we discussed it at the table. Through a series of other mishaps, half the group ended up wandering off the path we were supposed to stay on and finding a bright white marble fountain. It had dried up. There was the image of a fish jumping from the fountain. The otter ragamuffin, being the jokester that he is, decided it would be a good idea to pee in said fountain. As he did, bells started chiming in the distance, and villagers from the town began to shuffle towards the fountain and were chanting. The penguin and the otter decided to jump in the now filled fountain to see how deep it went. It looked like it was bottomless. It was not. The bottom was still there. They just seemed to be splashing around in a few inches of liquid. However, when they were in, they had a vision of a fish-headed being. The being communicated with the penguin mailman and bade him to deliver a package, which somehow manifested in the real world. At that point, we managed to get it out of the villagers that years before there was a woman who fell in love with this fish god, which was taboo subject. So they proceeded to imprison said fish god in the shrine, and yearly they performed a ritual where they would desecrate his fountain with urine to keep him locked up. Somehow we started that ritual early, which made it not quite as strong, which allowed him to reach out to us. Not your average story by any means. Definitely comical. We were laughing. Far more interaction with other people. Obviously, you just received the shortened version. We do plan to play in a few weeks, so if it is noteworthy, maybe I'll post a video of the continued story. As far as Wanderhome goes, I enjoyed the system. It's not for everybody. If you want a bunch of combat, choose a different system. If you want to get together with your friends and laugh and tell stories, obviously we told a whale of a story there. I think Wanderhome might be a good one to experience with your friends. I also think it would be a amazing system to play with younger children, just because you can help guide the story and then ask them what they think happens and let them kind of stress their mind and see what they can think of. Overall impression was high of Wanderhome. My biggest issue was that I didn't see a single meth weasel. But who knows, that might be my next character. If you enjoy my videos, please like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.